So that's all it's doing. It's just a discussion about what's the source of the prohibition. Was it a decree to treat them in the same legal status as a Jewish woman in a time when it's prohibited to have sexual relations, or is it a biblical prohibition? That's all. Next one, a Jew may have sex with a child as long as the child is less than 9 years old. That is baloney.
And just to say, he posted that particular one as well.
Go look. And by the way, I would encourage people, go and look up these sources yourself. I would warn you, try and go back to the beginning of the Talmudic discussion. And ideally, if you're not trained in reading Talmud before, you'll probably find most of these very confusing. The Talmudic discussion does require lots of training. But let's take a look at this source over here. What's going on is that, first I explained to you, therefore, just as one who engages in intercourse, and by the way, the non-bold text is not the Talmud, it's a commentary. Yeah. The bold text is the Talmud. Just as one who engages in intercourse actively is not liable if he's less than 9 years old. Let me explain what this is, okay? There's two prohibitions involved whenever you engage in intercourse, okay? If there's no consent from the other person, you're liable for damages, just like you're liable for damages if you ever use, hurt, or manipulate a body of any other human being, Jew, non-Jew, child, adult, as every decent legal system has sanctions for. There's a separate question. There are lots of laws in the Torah that are to do with sexual activity and sexual transgressions. For example, adultery, right? Homosexuality is forbidden. And some of these come with punishments. For an act to get those punishments, it has to be called a sex act, right? It can't just be physical use of somebody else's body. There has to actually be a sex act, and there's technical definitions of it, right? There has to be penetration, exchange of seed, and so on, in order to violate the biblical command. And what the Talmud says is if a boy is 9 years old and penetrates a woman, it's not considered an adulterous act because it's not considered a sex act, right? Whoever initiated it and harmed the other person is still liable for harm. It's just saying the technical laws and punishments to do with the sexual act don't apply if the child is under 9 years old. It's not that the woman hasn't performed adultery. They've just done abuse of a child. They've just, harmed that person as if they physically harmed them or emotionally harmed them in any other way. That's all that's going on over here. Is the liability, the special extra liabilities for a act of physical intercourse, a procreative act, what age does that start? And there's other technical criteria as well in order to violate the actual, let's say, adulterous act or homosexual act or whatever else it might be over there.
But isn't it at the end it's saying that the adult that engages with the child is not liable? That's what it looks like it's saying.
Not liable for what? For the sexual crime, the punishment that comes with the sexual aspect of the crime.
So what would they be liable for in Torah?
What's that?
So what would they be liable for in Torah? What's
if in any way harmed physically or emotionally that child, there's regular penalties. There's a penalty for tsar, any pain caused. There's a penalty for boshas, any psychological damage caused. There's a penalty for nezek, any damages caused. There's a penalty for any medical costs that are involved. There's penalties.
So to be clear, it is prohibited.
Absolutely forbidden.
Yes.
That's not a
I know, but let's just be clear.
Again, a person who doesn't know Talmud, and often the Talmud isolates one issue when there's many, many issues going on here. Right, so there's two issues here. One, have you harmed the child? Of course you've harmed the child. That's a whole separate discussion, nothing to do with this. Right. The second issue, which Talmud's focusing on right over here, is have they both been involved? And in this case, a child would never be liable anyway. But is the adult also involved for whatever sex crime there might have been separate for a forbidden sexual relationship? And that, the Talmud says, no, there's not the forbidden sexual relationship. The damage to the child is a whole separate discussion. That's elsewhere. Right. That's something you have to. Right. That's something that fits into all the regular laws of damages. So again, this is, it's ridiculous. Again, it's not ridiculous. What they've done is they've taken a thing, they've slightly put it out of context, and they made it sound like it's saying something completely different to what it says. Right? A Jew may have sex with a child. That's ridiculous. Did not, by the way, even that, it didn't say they may have sex. It said they're not punished for the sexual law, the sexual punishment, which often is a death penalty, by the way. Right?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things they like. Go on, please.
Many other technical grounds on which a person would not be punished for sex. In fact, the Talmud says that you almost never give a death penalty because there's so many technical exemptions. That's not the same as harm. They're two completely different issues.
Right. Because there is a lot of people in Dan's circles will make claims of Jews somehow sanction pedophilia. They often cite verse in the Talmud which talk about people getting married or having relations at very young ages.
Well, by the way, it is true that in most of history, I believe people married in their early teenage years. They became farmers, they worked and support families. It was not unusual for 14 or 15-year-old boy and girl to get married. People's lifespans were not as long. Everything was shorter. Right? But the idea that you can just go and take a child and have sex with them is actually, it's totally wrong. And there's plenty of places where Jewish law cites that it's wrong and it's not allowed. That's not that's not a particular but that's exactly the point. So what it's doing is taking, is there a special punishment for the extra crime of having transmitted seed into the body? And the answer is that if the boy under 9 years old penetrates a man or woman, then it's not considered like he sent seed in. That's really all it is for that law.
Right.
Anyone who used that child for that purpose, absolutely forbidden. It's absolutely, it's a regular act of terrible damages and so on.
Do you want to quickly go through the second column? Yeah.
A goy hits a Jew, he must be killed. Now, again, if you look at the Talmud, you'll see the word used is chayav misa, right? Is obligated death. As Maimonides points out, that never means you go and kill them. I'll give you an example. It says that if a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, walks down the road and there's a stain on his shirt, he's also must be killed. Right? That doesn't mean you physically go and kill them. I explain what it does mean. I'll tell you another example. Right? This says in Pirkei Avot that a person who forgets any of their Talmud is obligated to his life, which means he must be killed. It means in heaven there's a punishment, a potentially loss of the world to come. Very right. What it's saying over here, that a non-Jew who uses anti-Semitic violence could lose, God will punish them with the potential of being killed in the world to come. That's what it means. When does it mean a physical death penalty? When it says neherag, right? That's referring to if there was a Sanhedrin or a rabbinic court, they could try them. It never says that about a non-Jew hitting a Jew unless they're about to kill them, in which case the same law applies to a Jew. If a Jew or non-Jew is about to kill someone, you can kill them to save the other one's life. But no, the Talmud absolutely does not say that if a non-Jew hits a Jew, he must be killed. That's absolutely ridiculous. By the way, it does bring a source point, which is that Moses kills the Egyptian, right? But the Talmud commentary will ask on that, but there the whole point is that he had some kind of prophetic insight. You can't draw the analogy. So this is exactly the same as all over the Talmud where it says, a Torah scholar walks out with a stain on their jacket. It doesn't mean you take them to court and kill them. It means that if they are creating a desecration of God's name, because people look at them and say, oh gosh, people who serve God are filthy, and that leads to people rejecting God, then that person has to defend themselves on did that violate the whole purpose of life, right? If a Jew wantonly just forgets Torah, now of course we all forget, we're humans, right? But in other words, it means they don't care enough to try at least to memorize. Then there's another potential issue. And again, you understand this is a rabbinic way of talking, and at worst it means that you have what to answer for, a very serious thing to answer for in the world to come. And absolutely, people who are violent in the name of anti-Semitism, people who gather Jews on the street and beat them up, are going to have to answer a very serious question and possibly lose their world to come for it. That's what it's saying. Right? Yeah. So again, now, again, an innocent person just sees this as a one-off line of it. Oh my God, but anyone looks inside the Talmud, and anyone looks inside that Talmud, to be fair, and doesn't know that rule and hasn't seen the other bits of Talmud that use the parallel phrase might get confused by that. That could have been an innocent mistake. Right? Yeah. Same thing with the next one. When a Jew murders a Gentile, there'll be no death penalty. Let's go again. What's going on over there? We're talking about biblical law here, by the way. This is talking about in the land of Israel, where anyone who enters the land of Israel and becomes a citizen of the land of Israel and agrees to keep its law is fully protected by the law. Is a Jew allowed to murder a non-Jew? Absolutely not. It's completely forbidden. Again, numerous sources. If you want them, I can help you. If anyone wants in the comments, I'm happy to share loads and loads and loads of sources.
It's one of the Ten Commandments.
Right, there you go. So it's, you cannot kill, doesn't say any Jew, 100%. Yeah, 1,000% right. Now, here what it's saying is, what refers to the non-Jew in this category is somebody who enters the land of Israel and refuses to keep any of the law. Right, they're literally, the Talmudic word is they're an idol worshipper. So that's like somebody who comes into a country to rebel against its law. Can they then appeal to the courts to get the courts to punish others who have violated them? And then the courts will not intervene and punish. If they've rejected the court's authority and law, then they cannot use the court to punish others. That's all it's saying. nothing, God forbid, to say that it's okay to kill. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? Even the way it quoted there, by the way, didn't even say that there will be no death penalty. By the way, the minute you leave the land of Israel, or you're in a time where there's no Sanhedrin and no Torah law, obviously it doesn't apply, because they're not rejecting the law in not keeping the Torah.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Right.
I think it's worth doing this because people get thrown these
Sorry,
quotes the whole time, so it's worth going through them.
Okay, so Tosfos Yevamos 84b. Now, I've checked this Tosfos because I wasn't familiar with it. Tosfos is not the Talmud; it's a commentary on the Talmud. There's 3 on that page. I checked them. I don't believe it's there. I think this is a fabrication. Again, I might be wrong. If somebody can, or maybe it's from. It's a very surprising phrase, and if it exists anywhere, which I don't believe it does, then what you'll have is, I'm sure, like all the others, it'll just be completely out of context nonsense. Next one, if a Jew finds an object lost by a Gentile, it does not have to be returned. Well, that's because under Gentile law, it does not have to be returned. The Talmudic principle, by the way, if there is a Gentile law that says you do have to return it, which a lot of states have nowadays, then a Jewish citizen of that country or a Jewish visitor to that country is absolutely bound by their law. The Torah has 2 principles. What's the absolute base legal obligation, basic moral obligation? And the general principle in the ancient world was finders keepers. I believe it's even in Roman law that way. So if you find a lost item, you're legally allowed to keep it. The Torah then says you're meant to go beyond the law when it comes, you're meant to treat Jewish people like you treat your own family members. So that to the non-Jews of the world, we're like friends, right? To the Jewish people of the world, we're like family. And the Torah always demands that you go beyond what's the general normal obligation. So even in a place where there's no legal obligation to return and finders keepers, right? If they're Jewish, you have an obligation to return. If they're not Jewish, you have an obligation to do whatever is the normal law of the land. That's all. So it's like, you look at this, you see, we don't like non-Jews. God forbid, right? And like I say, in any legal place or where the norm and the standard behaviors assume that you return it, you return it. Jews may use lies to circumvent a Goy Gentile, Bava Kama 1138. Now this, I'm afraid, ironically enough, is a lie. That's not what the Talmud says. In fact, the Talmud is very explicit that we're not allowed to lie against a non-Jew. Bava Kama 113a, Jews may use lies to circumvent a Goy Gentile. That is rubbish. I'll just give you a classical Talmudic source. Chulin 94a, as Shmuel says, it's forbidden to deceive anyone, even an idolatrous Gentile. Right? I'm not talking about non-Jews, I'm talking about people who are absolute idol worshippers, never allowed to. And again, numerous other sources say the same thing. What's going on in 113a is a different principle. Is if you're doing business with somebody who's not Jewish, and they make a mistake and give you more than they make a mistake in your favor, you're not obligated to return the mistake. That's all. Again, that was a standard practice in legal system. If the local law of the land is different, you're always obligated to follow the standard of the law of the land. But it never says you can use lies to circumvent a non-Jew. On the contrary, it will be absolutely forbidden to lie, to steal, to cheat them in any possible way. And that's explicit only in the Talmud, that's explicit in all the codes of Jewish law too. So it's typical, so this is an example of something that whoever wrote this clearly knew they were distorting. There were others where it could have been a genuine mistake. There's no way that was a genuine mistake. That was an absolute distortion, like the majority of them. Last one, Avodah Zarah 22a, 22b, Gentile Goys prefer sex with cows. Rubbish. What's going on over there is there's a law in a place which was quite frequent at the time of when Jewish law was being codified, where some of the pagan idolatrous people around would also engage in bestiality. If you suspect that's what's going on, you're forbidden to sell an animal where it's reasonable to assume that it might be used for sex with an animal, right? In other words, you have to protect them from sinning. You have to protect the animal from abuse. You can't just do that. That's all that's going on over there.